Hello Year 6 and welcome to the next chapter of Fly Me Home. Okay, so we are on chapter 19. The day after I met Mrs. Doyle, Betsy and I were sitting on the patch of scrubby grass across the road from our house. Betsy had told me last week that she and her family were going back to Colombia for a couple of weeks, but I tried not to think about it. Though I knew that she would come back, 2 weeks without her felt like a long time. It was the last afternoon we had together before she left. The ground beneath us felt cold, and we had to keep getting up and running around and stamping our feet to keep warm. I remembered my home, where the earth was baked by the sun and radiated into the soles of your feet. The heat eased into your limbs and your bones, so you never felt truly cold. "I go get the football," Betsy said, and at that moment her brothers burst out of her house, calling out and jostling one another, the football on the ground in front of them. "Hey!" Betsy shouted to them. She stood up, lifting her shoulders and straightening her back so that she was as tall as she possibly could be. "It's our turn now." "You had your go, Betsy. You had it yesterday," one of the taller boys said. Betsy had told me their names: Miguel, Juan, Alejandro, David, Diego and Pedro. But I couldn't tell them apart. "Hey!" Betsy shrieked and sprinted over to them. Even though she was much smaller than them, she was louder. The boys flinched a little as she shouted, "My turn! Me and Lilu! We are cold!" One of the shorter boys, who was holding the football, looked as though he was going to hand it over. "No, Pedro," the tall one said, and stood in front of him. "Betsy, you and your little friend can't have it. You can play with us if you want to, but you can't have it all to yourselves." In a flash, Betsy had turned towards me, her eyebrows raised and questioning. I gave the tiniest shake of my head. I didn't mind playing football with Betsy, but I definitely didn't want to do it in front of all her brothers. "Next time it's ours," Betsy said to the tall one, and though she was only half his size, she prodded him in the chest. The force of it made him take a step back. Her brothers ran off, a blur of bodies. Betsy ran back and sat down beside me once more, a little deflated. She sighed loudly. "You can play without me," I suggested. "I don't mind. If it wasn't for me, she'd be playing football with her brothers." "No, little fish," Betsy said straight away. "I stay with you. Little fish stay together." She smiled over at me, a crooked sort of grin. Suddenly, I didn't feel so cold anymore. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to tell Betsy everything. All that had happened with the walnut and the pine cone, the moss and the conker. How I'd found them and what they had allowed me to do. "Betsy, I have to tell you something. It's a secret." "I won't tell," she said immediately. "I've been finding things. Just over there." I pointed to the bin. "Rubbish?" "No, not rubbish. Someone's put things there on purpose, I think, so I would find them." "What things?" Betsy asked, crinkling up her nose. "Things that give you powers," I said. "Powers?" I know it doesn't sound real, but I swear it's true. The thing might look ordinary, a walnut, a conker, but they make you able to do things. "What are you saying, little fish?" Betsy said. "Magic?" "Well, yes, it is magic, I suppose. I know it sounds crazy, but honestly, each time I wanted something to happen, I held them in my hand, and it did." I described to her the coin toss when we first moved in, the way the walnut had moved in my hand, how using the pine cone had fixed the broken mobile phone. The conker had made Dad appear in the playground, and the moss had made Tyber return that night. I was all alone. Every time it's worked. So if you can make something happen right now if you want. Betsy's eyes gleamed. She stood up expectantly, slapping her hands against her thighs. "Well, no. I realise that you can only use each thing once. It gives you just enough power to change one thing. You can't keep using it over and over. And I only have the leaf left now. I haven't found any more things." "So the mystery person stopped leaving you things?" "Yes," I said. "It's been several weeks since the last gift. I don't know why, but I'm going to leave something there, so whoever it is knows that I haven't forgotten them. Then maybe they'll start up again. I'm going to do it tomorrow when Mum's not around." "Show me exactly where you find the things." We walked over to the bins. My bin had collected some odd pieces of foam and an old dusty computer that looked like a tower block. Just as I was gesturing to the spot in between the bin and the lamppost, Betsy's grandmother, Maria, came out and called her in for dinner. "Bye then, little fish," Betsy said, "until we meet again." "Bye. Have a good time in Columbia." My voice sounded very small, like when I tried to talk on my first day of school. Betsy suddenly launched herself at me in a hug. "I miss you," she whispered fiercely into my ear, and then she turned and ran towards her house. "Betsy," I shouted. She turned her head. "I'll miss you too. Don't forget me, other little fish." "Never," Betsy said. She grinned crookedly and then disappeared into her house. That night, I took the piece of silver birch bark out of my reading book. It had got flattened and a bit cracked, but it was still in one piece. The next morning, I put the bark in a carrier bag and carefully wedged it into the slot before Tiber came out. I thought about it all day at school. I wondered again who was leaving things for me there. I wondered if they would find my gift, whether they would like it, and I thought about Betsy too, travelling back to her home country, the distance between us getting greater and greater with every moment that passed. I finished school and I wondered where she was then. Mum was waiting for me outside as usual, and I pulled her towards our house eagerly. "What's the rush, Lilu? Why are you in such a hurry?" she asked. When we turned into our street, I sprinted over to the bins, but I could see immediately that the silver birch bark had been taken.